It's going to just be a short summary, some thoughts about Ukraine. So I guess just stick it from as far back as I think is useful to look at it. Is its position in the USSR and the conflict between America and the USSR, which is decayed into the conflict between the US and Russia. As the USSR disintegrated and you have states like Ukraine coming back into existence. And there was a clear error there at some point in the kind of strategic element of how things were written up, because the Crimea being part of the Ukraine is just so strategically ridiculous, considering its importance to Russia, that no one would have ever signed that away. That, I don't know if it was Trotsky or something like that. It just seems madness. But you can see that because as soon as Ukraine does become independent, the Crimea is basically just rented off Ukraine by Russia from the word go. So in some ways it never does actually leave Sevastopol right up to the present day. So that's important, I think, really, to look at and see the reality of it when people talk about the invasion of Crimea. Russia never left. Even when Ukraine was independent, it just rented it off of it. So, and that was probably an issue, these kind of contentious issues related into the subject. But still, you have this kind of independent Ukraine, which is, I don't think, that independent because of the power structures are still wedded to Moscow. And even today, I think, well, the war is on, but what it looks like is Ukraine is, even more so than a lot of other countries, is heavily controlled by oligarchs, like a handful of powerful business, monopolies and stuff, who were clearly favourable to Moscow right up until I think the issues that are rising really come to a head in 2014 and the revolution. But before that, even, you have in 2008, you have NATO giving out clear declarations they wanted Ukraine in. And I think we should go back to that and bet that is just madness, isn't it? Ukraine was released as a neutral country. It broke away from the USSR under neutrality to create a buffer. This is important. It was important then. It's important now. I think the NATO saying it should join is provocative, and it's there. This war starts there, really. Many of the people dying in it weren't even born, probably. 2008, maybe. Let's see. That is still 15, 13. Maybe. Still. But yeah, I think then what you probably see is this kind of corrosion of the kind of oligarch power by social society, in a sense, that leads to this revolution. This outpouring of social, and it's clearly very. There was lots of social democratic. A lot of people came out on the streets to demand changes to this kind of oligarch power, and the 2014 thing came to a head because Ukraine had turned down a deal from the EU and gone back to Russia. So that was, it was like a trigger, like a clear sign of just continuing corruption. Also, you can see it's a clear sign that it's a shift. Ukraine wanted to shift economically towards the West, and it is a shift in power. Economics is power. So, but when you look at those revolutions, it's hard to look back now in time, really, to see what happened. But if it wasn't for like a seriously nationalist, ultra nationalist element to the protests that were armed themselves, basically seized government buildings, and they played a key role in a very swift change from power, and they continue to play a key role. These kind of armed nationalists. And the papers used to report about it because they were quite scared of it. Kind of liberal papers like to point it out, like the Guardian, BBC, a bit liberal. These kind of neo-Nazis and stuff. But now they won't mention it because the news is entirely politicised, and now papers have made a choice which side they're on, and they won't objectively report things now. This is very much whatever helps win the war from that side they've chosen. But yeah, well, I've lost the plot a bit there. But yeah, anyway, this 2014 revolution, and you have this shifting of power. You have votes held. I think there's two. One prime minister comes in, and totally fails. Seems to fail to achieve anything. And over this period of time, there's like separatists. There is like proper separatist movements that aren't just Russian. Obviously Russian funded. As soon as they just go, oh, I'm a separatist, Russia's easily just going to give them money. But it doesn't mean they are still like honestly separatists in their endeavours. And it seems like there's quite a wide movement for areas, especially in the east of the country, that weren't so bothered about Russian corruption and oligarch corruption, or they were happy more so with the status quo. And also seeing an opportunity, that there's been an armed revolution that's decapitated the government effectively and enforced itself. So why can't we, enforce our will in a local area? And this just kicked off. And obviously, with the 2014 revolution happening, Russia can see geopolitically it's lost Ukraine. That part of Ukraine is now going to go towards the EU. Economically, it will then push to agree with his previous statement about joining NATO. You can see the writings on the wall. And so that's why it seizes Crimea, with the troops it has stationed there already, and just rips up the renting deal basically. So we're not renting it, we're just keeping it. And they have a referendum, and obviously if it's the West will say the referendum is bogus because it's at gunpoint, and I have no idea, absolutely no idea, never been to Crimea. But yeah, if the referendum was only going to go one way, you'd be pretty brave to go the other way, wouldn't you, really, with the entire Russian Navy, military and everything there. So yeah, it is corrupted almost from the start. But geopolitically you can see the necessity of it. If you can't see the necessity of it, then you just don't understand geopolitical power and how it projects itself, and how. So like America has like 6 navies or something. Most countries have 6 ships. Like they have fucking like 6 navies, in each of the fucking seas, and the Ukraine would have just let them park their navy in Sebastopol if Russia didn't just make this kind of radical move. So it sucks, but if America could do that, it would just squeeze Russia. You'd abuse its positions. It would not be this benign hegemon. It just wouldn't. They're cunts. I'm sorry. America's not cunts to Britain, but they are cunts. So. And they learn it from us, I think, a lot of it. So anyway. So from 2014 to 2 months ago, I think you've got this period where you have armed uprisings in the east of the country that take to certain regions, Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and Mariupol actually is taken as well. And this is where it comes back interesting again. Like this is why people were mentioning nationalists more back then, because there's like a kind of counterattack by the Ukrainian army, which is just a mess at the time. It hasn't been beefed up by its NATO allies yet, and it's like really pretty shit and struggles to retake some of that territory, but it does retake some of it. But the greatest success is in Mariupol, where the nationalist battalion, the Azov neo-Nazi battalion, goes to action, and they take the city. So I think this is interesting when you look at the history of why Mariupol now, it's not just its strategic sense, cutting it off from that land bridge to the Crimea, which is why it's important. It's why Russia's committed to taking it. It's like, this has to be taken. We'll talk about strategic aims in a minute, I guess, but it's more this notion that it's the nationalist battalion that took it, and now they're holding it, and they've held it to the death. And I think it's interesting, that narrative, and the importance of this battalion in the revolution, in the kind of suppression of the initial independence movements, or Russian takeover movements, whatever way you look at it. And now, like, the most bloody battle has been for Mariupol. I mean, there's not much you can tell from the news really for facts, but it seems like generally Russia hasn't tried to get into a city. It's tried to encircle them, and I think it's had a lot of casualties trying to do that, from hit and run light infantry with anti-tank missiles and stuff. But the only city I think it's really tried to take is Mariupol, and I think primarily because of its strategic importance. If Russia was to go into this war and come out with just one thing, it would be a land bridge to the Crimea. That would be it. If it could just be like, well, no more gains, then that's at least something. It would probably go for more, but yeah. I don't know if it ever was. Well, maybe we can talk about that now. Yeah, like what is the strategic aims of Russia, Putin, and because in there, of course, I think a media source is just trying to fool you when it tries to talk about someone as insane, be it Donald Trump, George Bush, or Putin. I mean, there's plenty of footage to show that two of those people are idiots. But really, I think, trying to pen someone as insane, straight away at least, it removes you from the ability to find peace with them, because you can't. Peace is a rational thing you come to. And you can't find that with somebody who's insane. So it's degrading for that possibility. But also it's just not true. So it's best to try and look at it like, what would be the strategic aims of Russia. But actually, this is jumping the gun a bit. I mean, before that, first is the cause. Why does it go from these kind of independence movements to full-scale war? And the narrative in the media is there's just like this kind of quaint, independent, sovereign Ukraine that's just trying to control its own territory, and there's insurgents have risen up, been paid for, and a lot of them are mercenaries for the Russian government, and they need to be suppressed, put down. Sovereign control retaken over the area, and on that narrative, since 2014, 15, 16, NATO has been supplying and arming the Ukrainian military, beefing it up, which just played into the kind of worry from Moscow, because it's just like, in the end you can't have a NATO armed nation like Ukraine on Moscow's borders. It's a big nation. You could really stack it, and even without talking about nuclear weapons, even if there wasn't such a thing as like fucking hypersonic nuclear weapons, it's just very provocative to have that much NATO war gear so close, to like all the important parts of Russia. So yeah, I think the West has this very provocative part to play in this, and it's a power struggle. It's not naive. It's not. I don't know. It's a power struggle left over from the Cold War, and it's still going on. Both nations need their enemies. America needs its enemies. Britain needs its enemies. Russia needs Sevastopol. So, yeah. So I think this is what happens to retake the Donbass region. The Ukraine starts to increase its military capabilities and with a lot of NATO hardware. That is either used as an excuse or it does generally spook Russia into building up troops to be like, there's a certain point here. If we just allow the Donbass to fall and this huge wave of NATO hardware into Ukraine, there'd just be no stopping Ukraine joining NATO and this whole nasty situation. So it probably times things probably as well with, in all honesty, I think Putin couldn't go ahead with something like this when Trump was in the White House, because Trump, I think he's a loose cannon. I don't think he was in the pay of Putin. I think Putin probably helped him get in the White House, but and I don't think the thing about Donald Trump is I don't think he was actually connected. He was connected to like the bourgeois fucking stock owning rulers, but he wasn't connected into the like deep state of American politics that has like a consistent geopolitical aim. Whoever's in the kind of White House, I think he definitely was detached from that, and so I definitely think Putin couldn't have risked an invasion because he wouldn't have been able to know. He wouldn't be able to know. Even though you think maybe he would have backed him, you wouldn't be able to know. He would be a bit trigger happy with them nukes, you know. So I think you probably had to wait till the Biden administration, because I think the Biden administration would be pushing for more weapons into NATO, would be stepping up the pace. So, you know, it would be engaging again in the geopolitical struggle, which may have taken a slight hiatus with Trump there, kind of wildly, sporadically engaging with it, like killing that general in Iraq. But yeah. So I think there had to ever been peace really in for this situation. Firstly, both Russia and America needed not to want to actually go to war with each other. They needed to not to want to provoke each other. Like America has provoked this. There are ways that Ukraine could have been born and exist with the kind of neutrality. I think this Crimean thing, it should have just been allowed. It's just been like, right, and the Donbass, actually. I think it's just been like, right, okay, that's part of Russia, there's Ukraine, and it's neutral. This would have solved the geopolitical issues involved, I think, generally. And then instead of sending $800 million worth of arms to Ukraine, America could have just sent $800 worth of like really useful stuff. And, you know, Russia could have done that into the Donbass. And instead, everyone has blown everything up, killed each other. And you know what? I reckon it will end the same. That Russia controls the Crimea, the Donbass, maybe up to some part up to the river, and there'll be some boundary which is defined by like strategic elements I don't really understand, and the realities of the conflict as they unfold, and you know how long Ukrainian troops can hold out with peltry inputs of aid, in a sense. I mean, America could even be like, well, I just want this to drag on, so I'll give you just enough weapons to drag it on, but won't give you enough to conclusively defeat the Russians or lose. And, you know, America loves selling guns, so when they're saying £800 million of military aid, it just means the American people are spending their taxpayers' dollars on the guns. And I don't know, everyone wants to hate Russia now, but I don't see the evil plot. In the run up to it, I saw them arguing for the Minsk agreements or the Normandy ones that they were trying to be turned into in this political play, but they seemed agreements which were at least based in realities of power, if not the fucking truth. I mean, how would it say itself anyway? So, and then everyone would just make up the fucking truth around it. So, but that's another thing. You don't see anything, do you, online, talking about peace? No one's like, hang on, how do we stop it all? I know it started, and once things kick off, it's all a bit hard to just stop. But no one really seems to be talking about even what it is, what that looks like. I mean, they weren't talking about it before. I noticed before the war started, no one spoke about the Minsk agreements. It's really funny because like they just didn't mention them, and as soon as the war started, oh, the Minsk agreements are all rubbish now, and you're like, oh, they're suddenly important. Shit, could have fooled me. But now I guess you just have to let the violence carve out the line on the map. But it's so long and it's just such a ridiculous way to go about it. So many people got to die. Lives ruined. Buildings destroyed. Towns destroyed. That's what they should do now. They should just cut the south of east of Ukraine off. Either cede it to Russia straight off, or have the UN do a whole load of fucking referendums somehow. But yeah, you know, kind of it's a bit ideal. But I mean, I think you should just cut it off and be like, that's Russian, Ukraine, go neutral. Fucking hell, Russia, you gotta pay for a lot of this shit. And re-engage the fucking global economy. And give them loads of money. Give the Ukrainians loads of money. But no, because everyone's like, I've got to win the war. If Russia gets the fucking territory, then they win the war, and then they're gonna like set up a whole like fucking Russian empire. Even though it's quite clearly obvious now how hard it was to take Mariupol, that if you're not gonna go using nuclear weapons to beat people into submission, you're not gonna be like conquering Europe like World War II, like, you know. It's weird. I heard on the radio the other day this retired general talking about how we're not ready for war. Like NATO should be ready to go to war with Russia, and how we're not ready. And it's just like, well, how can you be ready for a hypersonic nuclear missile? Like 2000 of them or something. Like, it's just hard to be ready. And then I don't know what other kind of readiness he's talking about. Because what, you know, if Russia starts rolling the tanks over into Poland and Germany and just fire off the nukes, man, just ooh, everything's gone. Why have we forgotten that? Generals should know that, more than anyone. Anyway, if you stay to the end of that, I'm very fucking impressed.